Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the Attention Please podcast, now on video. For those of you who have not done so, please do like this video, subscribe to the channel. You know what to do. So today we'll be talking about Mahatma Gandhi, specifically his legacy. And this is about as close to October 2nd as I can get, hence this episode. So on social media, I noticed that the topic of Mahatma Gandhi, especially on October 2nd, usually vacillates between devotion to the ideal of Mahatma Gandhi and extremely trenchant criticism of him, to the extent that Nathuram Godse, his assassin, trends every year on October 2nd, which is shocking for me personally. So I've often wondered, because I grew up in an India in which devotion to Gandhiji was absolutely total. There was virtually no criticism of him. And that was because I kind of grew up in Congress India. And for them, Gandhi was projected as kind of a god in independent India. This was essential for the Congress brand, because the Congress has been surviving on what they did for independence, and Gandhi he was that brand ambassador. So Gandhi and Nehru there were two brand ambassadors. Nehru for his family, that's where they drew the legitimacy from, and Gandhi as I would say the ideologue of Congress. So there was virtually no criticism of Gandhi, at least not that we could see. And now on social media, and this basically happened once we started visiting the internet in 1999, when I first basically had access to the internet. And that's when I started reading about these hypercritical articles about Mahatma Gandhi in Rediff, in mailing lists. And it kind of opened my eyes, because I'd never seen this perspective. I mean, these were also based on facts that I had never been exposed to. And how would I? Most people of our generation in a pre-internet world grew up with Gandhi as he was covered in our history books, which was vastly regulated by the Congress government. So if you find Republic TV is the mouthpiece of the BJP, then the history books we read, which were kind of a cross product between censorship at the state level, which was the Bengali communists, and the Congress party at the center, it was virtually impossible to read anything which was even a little bit critical of Mahatma Gandhi. So history was a hagiography, and we accepted that. Then there was Amar Chitrakatha, which was no different. Then there was that movie by Richard Attenborough, which was played every year on October 2nd, which was also a hagiography of Mahatma Gandhi. And one thing that I always found highly ironic was, after everything was over, at the very end, when they show the credits, all the list of the British actors appear before the list of the Indian actors. So go and check it out. I'm pretty sure that's the case. And I've always found that to be hilariously ironic, given that, we spent 3.5 hours against, fulminating the British people, fulminating against the British Empire. And in the end, we see, well, guess what? It's the same thing. And of course, there was the more modern incarnation, which was Gandhigiri, courtesy Raju Hirani and Sanjay Dutt. Again, I wasn't particularly influenced by that. By that time, I'd already started reading about, let's just say, the darker or the grayer parts of the Gandhi legacy. So it was not that influenced me too much. As a matter of fact, when the movie had come out, when the whole concept, when the Gandhigiri thing was kind of going viral in India, I'd written a post where I'd said that what is being shown as Gandhism is a highly edited version of what the philosophy of Gandhi was. It kind of lops off, it kind of censors out all the disturbing facts, all the disturbing parts of Gandhi's vision, and kind of presents a very simplistic, happy, absolutely uncontroversial, kind of a tablet of what Gandhi's philosophical ideas were. And I had found that to be disingenuous at that point of time, and I'd written a review about that. But by that time, I'd already been exposed to, let's just say, the counter programming on Mahatma Gandhi. So I think, now in 2021, older, wiser, and having read quite a bit, I think there's time, and I think we are the generation which is post-independence, of course, and not that old, is for us to fairly evaluate Gandhi, to understand that, look, he was not the kind of godly figure that he was made out to be in our history books. No human being can, and Gandhi was definitely not even close. Let's first accept that. But let's also accept the fact that Gandhi was not responsible for partition. Gandhi wasn't responsible for many things that happened, and nobody is. One person cannot bring us independence, which is what history books claim that Gandhi did, at least in my high school. And neither did he kind of, damn India to perfidy, as many of the Hindu right-wing claim. So again, his significance is vastly overemphasized, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't significant, and I'm going to come to that. So it's important that our generation, that we read. There's a lot of material available on Gandhi, both the positive aspects of his legacy and negative. And any mature assessment of the man needs to consider both. So why do people kind of nowadays, why is there so much criticism of Gandhi from Indians? So just to summarize, and again, this video cannot even scratch the surface, is that, first of all, the Hindu right, it's very obvious why they hate him. They hate him, and they've always hated him, is because according to them, Gandhi was responsible to a large extent for partition, that he allied with the pan-Islamic fundamentalist movement, which ultimately led to Pakistan, that he with the Khilafat movement, he basically started it off. And to an extent, and that's, again, it's not false, that is true to an extent. And Jinnah himself was, his fallout with Gandhi was because he felt that Gandhi was taking political mobilization towards religion. And that, ironically, was something that Jinnah did not agree with initially, till later he realized that, you know what, if you can't beat them, you join them. And then he took it to another extreme. But that criticism is valid, but again, it's not entirely valid. There were, again, forces that over which Gandhi had no control, and he tried his best to the extent that he could. Again, he was not superhuman. And that's something which we always have to understand. And unfortunately, what's happened is the fact that there are so many Gandhi critics is because we have kind of been programmed to think of him as a god. And so when we find out that he's not God, there is this swing to the other extreme. So that's one reason why Gandhi is, hated by many, is because, he's considered to have laid the groundwork for Jinnah in terms of being overtly partial to the radical Islamic fundamentalist movement, which ultimately led to the birth of Pakistan. Now, there is another criticism and it's equally valid, from another section, which says that no, Gandhi was actually the other way too. He repeatedly undermined the Dalit movement under Dr. Ambedkar, and he pushed a dominant Hindu right ideology. He has been accused of doing that too. So he's been accused of doing both. And the thing is, both of them are true to an extent. And the third thing is, many people now, once the sordid secrets of Gandhi's personal life have come out, they have come, and I'm not going to get into the details of that. Those of you can Google, but there are rampant examples of his abuse of power, his, control over the bodies of men and women in his ashram, and as part of his experiments with truth. And again, one could say, that was his personal life, that was not, but with Gandhi, it's very difficult to draw the line between his personal life and his political life, because his political power came from his so-called, almost his beatitude, the fact that he was simple, the fact that he was this moral source. I mean, that was the thing. So if your entire strength comes from your moral core, then yes, the assessment of your moral code then becomes part of your politics. This would not be so relevant for, let's say, understanding Nehru's legacy or understanding Patel's legacy, because their strength or their politics did not come from their moral core. But with Gandhi, it was all about that. Gandhi realized that, and I'm going to come to that ultimately in Indian politics, the drama is the most important thing. And you just cannot do politics in the way Western democracies do it. And that was really his biggest contribution. So there are three reasons why Gandhi is hated. Firstly, summarizing, he was pro-Muslim. Second is he was too pro-Brahminical majoritarian Hindu. And third was that he basically exerted control over the bodies of women. He abused his power and he engaged in activities which, again, would make people very, very uncomfortable. And people were uncomfortable in those days. So if you go, if you say that, there's sometimes we say, people should be judged by the standards of their times. No, even in his times, what Gandhi was doing, there was a lot of criticism. It's just that, again, because of the absolute holdover communication that the Congress leadership had, that it never really, and there was no internet or nothing, so people didn't know. And after independence, the Congress basically controlled the historians in JNU. And before Arun Shourie, turned rogue, before he realized that he was not going to be a minister, he has actually written some very good books, which, with facts, has proven how the Congress government has essentially WhatsAppified. He didn't say that, but WhatsAppified our history in many ways. The history that we know to be true, it's very selective and cherry-picked, and it was done specifically to beatify and put a halo around the head of Gandhi and Nehru, and there is very obvious political reasons for that. But what's my assessment? What's a more mature assessment of Gandhi? Well, first of all, let's just get to the point that his moral virtue, everything that we know about his moral virtue, was performative. It was absolutely performative. So before social media, Gandhiji realized that performative is good. So it's well known that, I think it was Sarojini Naidu who said that there's the amount, if people knew the amount of money it costs to keep Gandhi poor. So this was entirely not him, and that is shown by the fact that he exerted that level of control, and the disturbing parts of Gandhi's personal life lead me, at least in my opinion, to conclude that the moral virtue that he projected was performative. But it was very much a part of who he was as a politician. As I said, he drew his power from that moral code, unlike other politicians. So because that moral authority is what gave him that distinction, which a Jinnah couldn't get. Jinnah could never get that kind of mass appeal, no matter how much he tried. Or Nehru, nobody could get that much mass appeal because they didn't have that moral code. They could not, let's say, sell their moral code in the way that Gandhi did. And when I say sell, I don't mean it in any pejorative sense here at all. Now, the other thing that I am never convinced with, and this is not new, it's been a long time coming, his ideas on the economy, his return to the village, this kind of Luddite, the Luddite philosophy that he followed, where let's shun all Western industry, let's shun Western ideas. It was absolutely the wrong direction to take the country. This was, again, something on which Rabindranath Tagore had great disagreement with him, in the sense that Rabindranath Tagore said that, unlike what Gandhi thinks, according to Rabindranath Tagore, the village is really the cesspool of bad ideas, and that India needs to move ahead. If we need to move to a casteless society, we cannot go back to what we were before the British came. While Gandhi was absolutely all about going back to what India was, of course, the way he imagined India was before the British came, this was also something which Nehru did not agree with, and which was why after Gandhi died, Nehru took it in a different path. He took India on the path of industrialization, and he did good. That's one of the enduring legacies of Jawaharlal Nehru too. The third thing about Mahatma Gandhi was that he was, extremely intolerant of contrarian opinion. So if you look at, the culture of today's Congress party, and today the culture of any Indian political party, the fact that, there is never really any dissent, that actually is a legacy of Gandhi's, because he is the main thing. Gandhi defined Indian democracy. That's in one line. That's what makes him significant. And as part of that, this whole one person authoritarian hold over a party, which is what Gandhi had, is really a legacy of him. And we can see that in the modern Congress party, of course, where the choice is, should it be Rahul Gandhi or should it be Sonia Gandhi? That's the level of choice. It's the kind of choice that General Zia used to give in Pakistan. Do you want General Zia as an Islamic leader, or do you want him as the General Supremo? That's the choice you had. or perhaps for those of you who like, Austin Powers, shall we shag now or shall we shag later? So there's really no choice in this case. Now, this intolerance, and for those of you who don't know, please do read your history about Gandhi's relationship with Subhash Chandra Bose and what happened when Subhash Chandra Bose won the presidency of Congress. Just read about what happened. So Gandhiji was extremely intolerant of contrarian opinion. And this, I think, is, still persists in India in terms of our democratic system. But really, so I've been talking, and somebody would at this point of time say, well, you haven't said anything good about Gandhi so far. Everything is like either you've damned him with faint praise or you've just gone ahead and said, this was bad. But no, I'm coming to the real thing. So his real achievement, again, which I've mentioned the sentence, but I'll say it again, is that he defined a uniquely Indian style of popular democracy, which was absolutely contrary to the idea that Nehru had, who was educated in England, that Western, let's stand up in parliament. It was more an, basically Aristotelian concept of what a democracy is, as there's these group of elites who rule the country. They know what's right. You really don't let the uneducated, unwashed people come in and take decisions. Yeah, they're there, they'll do some elections, but ultimately it is going to be, gentlemen who will rule the country. This is really what the conception that Nehru and his friends had. Gandhi turned that idea on its head. And Indian politics was stronger because of that. It has led to true grassroots political leaders. The fact that you have a Lalu Yadav, irrespective of what you might think of him, the fact that you have a Lalu Yadav, the fact that you have a Mayawati, the fact that you have a Mamata Banerjee, this has happened because of the style of politics that Gandhi started. America doesn't have these kinds of people. I've been in this country for 20 years. And America doesn't have any analog. Americans, all politicians, all powerful politicians are lawyers, and they're all extremely privileged. You will never find a non-privileged person, an actual non-privileged person walking the corridors of power in the US. Despite it, anybody would say it's more open democracy. Actually, it's not. And that's because it never had a Gandhi here. America democracy never had a Mahatma Gandhi, never had somebody who took democracy to the people. There was nobody who did that. To an extent, and I almost tremble at the words, the person who's come the closest to it is Trump. He has taken politics, for good or for bad, as close to the people as possible, being a reality show star. And again, you might think that I'm kind of damning Gandhi by comparing him to Trump, but that is not true. I have much greater respect for Gandhiji than I have for Trump, but this is true. And so right now with Trump, you can see some people coming into the US politics who wouldn't have been in US politics a few years ago. But again, this is just an analogy. This is not a comparison of their mutual significance. So what did Gandhi do actually? So Gandhi, and he understood that in order for India to be an actual democracy, democracy has to be a grassroots movement. Before that, for the Congress, democracy was essentially a copy of what they saw in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. So the Congress party's essential thought process was, we are like the British. The British should now, just because we are brown-skinned people, British should not treat us as second-class citizens in our own country. We are British. Gandhi basically said, no, we are not British. The main independence that we need is for us to realize that we are not British. So for Gandhi, his anti-colonialism was at a much deeper level than Nehru's. So Nehru merely wanted the country to go from British hands to his hands. Everything else would remain the same. For Gandhi, that was not what Gandhi wanted. Gandhi wanted a moral, spiritual, some of it was of course impractical, but he wanted a revolution in India. And he wanted a revolution that starts at the very bottom. That's why Gandhi could get the crowds. That's why no other politician could get that. That's why Jinnah left the party, because he was obliterated. His influence was obliterated by Gandhi in his own base. That's the thing. In his own base, Gandhi removed him from his own base. He could come back only when he played the radical Islamic card, not before that. So that was his genius. And how did he do it? Well, he basically understood the mind of the Indian, unlike anybody. And that was because he was very Indian. Unlike Nehru and unlike most of the other people who were in power in Congress, they were not essentially Indians who had imbibed Western influence to an extent that they had kind of forgotten their Indian programming. Gandhi wasn't that. And that was his biggest strength. So the fact that he, first of all, established himself as a moral authority, that, wearing a loincloth, that simplicity, that poverty, you can say that's performative, but that's also good politics. That's what got him. Would India have been independent without him? Possibly, but not that fast. He wouldn't have been able. He dismantled British colonialism in India. It wouldn't have happened that fast without him, because and that was, again, Nehru was not able to articulate this, but he was able to articulate a narrative against colonialism, which the people understood. So it came from first of all, he realized that in India, you need a strong leader. You cannot have people, you cannot have the Greek style of democracy. So that's why even within the Congress party, he was very autocratic. It was his way or the highway. And if you didn't listen to him, he would fast. That's the thing. He got his way by leveraging the power that he had with the people. So many people, including Dr. Ambedkar, were extremely frustrated by his basically emotional blackmailing and getting his way by saying, I'm going to go on a fast. But again, these were weapons against which no other politician had any counter weapon. And this is the genius of Gandhi, that Gandhi, without, let's say, violence in the conventional sense, could cobble together this extremely diverse collection of different interests, and he could kind of shepherd them against British imperialism. This is unique in the annals of history, and this is what his significance truly is. So again, it came from his moral authority. It came from the fact that at least his projection was that he was definitely not like you and me, that he was a saint. That was the first thing. But he was a secular saint. He did not per se make very prominent his Hindu identity either. He was a saint, but he was a secular saint. He used metaphors of all religion. He was absolutely fine with adhering to any kind of majoritarian movement, which Nehru kind of had a problem with. Gandhi had no problem with religion in politics. Nehru did, because Gandhi realized that in India, this is what works. He was kind of like the Manmohan Desai of Indian politics. It might not have been pretty what he did, but he made money. Just like Manmohan Desai made money, Amar Akbar Antony, nobody would say is high art, but it wasn't. These are extreme. At one point of time, these were extremely emotional movies. People were emotional. Gandhiji understood that. He understood what nowadays highly paid executives who helm reality shows do. That how to get people emotional about brands, how to get people emotional about causes. And so this is what is, and I mean this with great respect as an author myself, to get people to care for your cause. This is possibly one of the highest ideals of communication that there can be. He was a communicator extraordinaire. Maybe not his ideas, he was not a great ideas person in terms of building a country, but in terms of communication, there has been no greater person, at least in my understanding in history. And I'm thinking of Nelson Mandela and everybody, even with comparing at that level also. So think about Dandi March. I mean, when the Dandi March started, his political fortunes were at one of his lower points. And the salt, people were like, how emotive is salt? It's okay, we get it, but it's not a big deal. And when the Dandi March started, he didn't have a lot of people. A lot of people were not supporting him even within the Congress. But he realized what would happen. He had this intrinsic understanding that of the emotional connect of an Indian with salt and with the British Empire. And that was what started it. And that kind of, that image of like hundreds and thousands of people walking with Gandhi, peacefully walking with Gandhi, the lines kind of joining village to village, the word spreading with no telephone, no social media, just the word spreading and people just coming from miles away to join this. That's that kind of mobilization. No other politician would have realized how to do it. And Gandhi figured that out. Gandhi figured that out at a point where there was a great risk to his own political career, but he did it. So it was not all, roses for Gandhi. It's not that it was one success after another. He had failures, but he came out of them. And that's the thing, this is, if you read the biographies of Steve Jobs, you'd see this kind of, these special people have these abilities that they dream big, that they do things which none of us can even imagine. They manage to do it. They manage to do it somehow. They figure it out. And that's what makes him great. And it's okay to admire this as well as criticize him for the other darker parts of his legacy. I don't think one necessarily takes away anything from the other. I mean, that's what makes him makes anybody really fascinating, because we are a mixture of good and bad. And one of the problems with Gandhi is that we have always been kind of trained, focused, that you have to look at as good. If you say something bad, you're the problem. So that's really what I wanted to say, in terms of, summing up. I don't consider Gandhi to be, the moral authority that I thought he once was when I was in high school. And I've read more, I know now more. So I don't consider him to be that kind of moral authority, moral inspiration. But I do consider him, and that's what I didn't understand so much when I was in high school, was that he was a political genius, unmatched. And that if we do not understand that, we are being remiss in understanding the significance of, and this political genius wasn't just something which he did for his own self. You have to understand that. So there's a bit of difference. So we all in a way live off his political genius. And I understand the skepticism about Gandhi's legacy, but it's also very important that we understand this part of him, the genius that he was. So thanks everybody for listening to this podcast. Again, please do subscribe to this channel, like and share this video. And if you like my podcast and want to show some appreciation, I don't know why, but do consider becoming a monthly Patreon contributor on my Patreon page. It's at Great Bong. So thank you everybody, and do have a nice week. Bye-bye.